Привіт! Це подкаст «Коли все має значення». Мене звати Ангеліна Карякіна, а зі мною
Наталка Гуменюк. Всім привіт!
Привіт тобі, Наталко. З-поміж твоїх безкінечних мандрів вибралися нарешті поговорити про, насправді, надзвичайно важливу для нас подію цього року, до якої і ти, і команда рухались дуже довго. Це прем'єра вистави, яку Reckoning Project разом зробили з Dash Arts. Розкажи, будь ласка, два слова, що це за вистава і чому саме цей проєкт Dash Arts?
Dash Arts – це британська, можна сказати, театральна компанія, яка працює в сфері документального театру. Зокрема, політичного театру, який робив раніше вистави і про права людини, і про якісь історичні події, на кшталт Бабиного Яру, не стосувався України окремо, але робив виставу, зокрема, Крим 5 ранку, допомагав у ній. Josephine Burton, яка є керівницею Dash Arts і, власне, режисеркою, яка поставила виставу The Reckoning, є давньою знайомою Пітера Померанцева, нашого колеги. І коли тільки засновували наш проект The Reckoning Project, ми завжди говорили про те, що свідчення людей, які вціліли від воєнних злочинів, мають стати ще чимось, окрім журналістських матеріалів, окрім того, щоб бути переданими аналітикам, правоохоронним органам. І окрім цієї історії з документальними фільмами, ми багато їх зробили, це зрозуміла для нас праця і завдання. Здається, з перших днів говорили про можливість того, що на основі цих свідчень може вийти театральна п'єса, може вийти художній твір, наприклад, чи фільм. І, власне, ця п'єса сталася. В 2022 році, вже коли ми назбирали певну частину свідчень, Джозефін цим зацікавилася, ми почали спілкуватися, обирати, передавати ті якісь свідчення, записи, розмови, інтерв'ю людей, які потерпіли, які ми мали. І зрештою вона разом зі сценаристкою Анастасією Косодii, власне, і написали цю виставу. Вона поставлена на сцені лондонського театру Arcola. Це доволі відомий незалежний театр. Це документальний театр, так? Це все-таки не масштабні постановки з купою акторів. Це дуже особлива річ, але це відомий незалежний театр. Довго готувалося те, як перекласти свідчення на мову драматургії. Власне, ось до 28 червня щодня у Лондоні йде ця вистава, і ми сподіваємося, що вона буде йти і далі. Потім.
Так, я страшенно шкодую, що там в силу якихось своїх обставин я не змогла подивитись цю виставу. Зрозуміло, що ви з Джозефін багато говорите про саму роботу, про специфіку, про свідчення. Мені, знаєш, хочеться тебе запитати, бо ти була на прем'єрі, ти її відкривала. Які твої враження як українки від цієї вистави?
Ліно, в мене точно найменше вражень, як в українки. Річ в тому, що я особисто знаю двох людей, чиї історії розказані в цій виставі. В двох випадках це ті інтерв'ю, які брала я, і ще 3 інтерв'ю, які брали інші наші колеги, так, але я їх дуже добре знаю. Тому я, напевно, найгірший приклад розказувати про цю виставу. Мені було, напевно, в залі весь час найскладніше, бо я постійно мала порівнювати мій рівень залученості, коли ти зараз читаєш театральні рецензії на цю виставу британських театральних критиків, які прийшли я говорила на тому, що називається Press Night, да, на ночі відкриття, вони говорять про те, що наскільки це близьке занурення в реальність, наскільки це близько, насправді глядач якось потрапляє в цю дуже чуттєву історію не героїзації і міфологізації того, що сталося, а от цієї людської трагедії, але також і якоїсь особливості, да, того, що переживають люди. Тому мені здається, була найтяжчим цим глядачем, який єдиний, по суті, в той час в залі, двічі, коли я була, знає, хто ці люди, бачив деяких з них, да, читав. І тому я весь час порівнювала з реальністю. Але що я зараз чую? Тому що я чую відгуки кожен вечір після вистави відбувається там є така деталь, вона називається food for thoughts, так, їжа для роздумів, є такий вислів, коли запрошені різні глядачі, в цьому числі, там, наприклад, такі люди, як там Орися Луцевич, яка представляє українську програму в Чермгаузі, чи там Рорі Фінін, викладач з Кембриджа, вони дають якусь свою рефлексію, так? Я можу тільки сказати, що мені написала буквально після вистави Орися, яка говорила вчора, буквально напередодні нашої розмови, казали, що вона до мурашок і що актори чудові, вони описують пекельні події, але є є і людяність, і надія. Але що мені сподобалося, що це не героїзація, а людина, яка вона є, зі страхами, сумнівами, почуттями провини і дуже relatable, тобто дуже спрацьовує. Мені спочатку було цікаво запитувати людей, скажімо, іноземців, як вони про це думають, і от зараз чути такі відгуки від українців.
Я тебе питаю, тому що ти знаєш, є ця дискусія, вона ведеться там на різних тонах стосовно того, чи готові ми працювати з воєнними злочинами у мистецтві. Ти пам'ятаєш всі ці дискусії стосовно фільмів там про Бучу і так далі, і так далі. В цьому сенсі в тебе не було якихось там сумнівів, чи готова ти на це зараз подивитися як глядачка?
В мене частина нашої розмови і звернення до Джозефіни, як їй вдалося зробити виставу доречну. Тому що, і ми в ній не сумнівалися. Ми б, напевно, не працювали з партнерами, які, скажімо так, чийсь смак, чи які там десь щось роблять інакше. І велика частина цієї розмови, що не треба робити. Театр – це складна річ. Він інколи поганий театр може викликати якесь почуття ніяковості. І я тут, хоча це є в нашій розмові, я дуже коротко поясню, в чому була її особливість і де були уникнені усі ці ризики. В нас є один актор, який грає конкретну людину з Київщини, яка пережила тортури і катування. Є збірний образ журналістки, яка бере інтерв'ю у нього. І інших потерпілих грають не просто актори. Є два українських актори, які грають флешбеки. Вони грають пам'ять журналіста. Вони, умовно кажучи, тому роблять це більш доречним. Умовно кажучи, у мене, наприклад, був острах. Я не театрал, мені навіть дивно про це говорити, хто я, щоб там критикувати, ймовірно, виставу, сценариста, професіоналів. Але ти міг уявити, як це буде, коли буде там 5 людей на сцені, які грають живих людей. Але в цьому випадку був оцей прийом того, що є кілька акторів, які дуже доречно грають певні монологи, в яких зрозуміло воно, що це, знаєте, те, що називається поганим словом театральщина. Вони є спогадами, поганою пам'яттю, тими флешбеками, які приходять до людини, яка слухає ці свідчення і не може стерти з пам'яті, тому що це щось шокуюче. І, власне, Джозефін також пояснює в цій розмові, де вона навпаки просила не перегравати, де вона просила збавити емоцію, де вона бачила, що, наприклад, там монолог жінки матері має розказати хлопець, тому що тоді це буде сприйнято і не буде надто драматизму. Тому, власне, це було частиною мого питання не в такому ключі, як працювати з таким сенситивним матеріалом, але як його зробити таким, щоб він був доречним. Я, до речі, хочу одну річ сказати для наших англомовних слухачів, які слухатимуть цей подкаст англійською мовою, оригінальну доріжку. Джозефін постійно використовує слово «шоу». Воно для нас може видаватися дивним, це не шоу. Але шоу англійською – це буквальний переклад слова «вистава». Вистава, п'єса – це просто шоу, це не розвага. Це слово доречне в цьому контексті, тому що ми просто звикли, що шоу – це щось таке, ось таке розважальне. Тому я звертаю на це увагу, що йдеться не про шоу, а дійсно якусь таку певну реальність. Це приклад того, що з матеріалом можна працювати. Просто хочеться його віддати тим людям, які розуміють цю межу і розуміють, що це мало би спрацювати на інших людей. І що ще я хочу? Ще одну річ, напевно, додати зі свого відчуття, крім вистави. 2 акторів британці, 2 акторів українці, які мешкають і працюють за кордоном. Тому Джозефін було важливо дати українцям цю сцену. Але я говорила з виконавцем головної ролі і просто хочу сказати, що це британський актор, який не має жодного відношення до України, тобто він слідкує за новинами, Але я просто хочу сказати, наскільки вони розчулені цією роботою. Його звати Том Годвін, а іншу актрису Маріан Олдман. Я з Томом довгий час якийсь встигла поговорити після обох вистав, і це настільки щире почуття турботи про цю людину, турботи про людину, яку він грає, якогось піклування і якогось відчуття, що ця людина пережила щось неймовірне, він постійно рефлексує, а як би я вчинив? І от я хочу в цьому випадку також те, що не побачили інші, звернути увагу на ось цю таку особливість британських акторів, які грають, та й акторів і всієї команди, яка там, яка з великою, я би сказала, повагою і любов'ю ставиться до цих свідчень і дуже важливо до людей, які все це пережили.
Ну, я впевнена, що ви з Джозефін поговорили і про це. Я лише від себе буду, знаєш, мріяти про те, що Держартс і далі повезе по світу цю виставу, її побачать не лише в Лондоні. Але від імені всієї команди хочу сказати і тобі, і всім, хто працював над цією виставою, величезне дякую. І це реально велика подія для нас і для проєкту. Ми багато з чим працювали, але театр, по-моєму, у нас все-таки вперше. Тому давайте слухати розмову Наталки з режисеркою Josephine Burton, яка поставила документальну виставу «Розплата» в театрі Аркола у Лондоні.
Я хочу подякувати тим слухачам і слухачкам, які вже присилають нам підтримку. Наша бухгалтерія повідомляє, коли пройшли певні суми, і страшенно вдячні за це. Я нагадаю, що наш подкаст «Коли все має значення» не має якогось окремого фінансування. Ми його робимо з власної ініціативи і хочемо, щоб цю роботу підтримували, особливо заради нашої команди, чудової редакторки Іри Лопатіної і звукорежисерки Люби Гук. Якщо у вас є така можливість, будь ласка, є реквізити, вони є і на нашому сайті лабораторії журналістики суспільного інтересу, і там, де це можливо, на тих платформах, можливо, ви можете прочитати, як ці реквізити знайти, а ми працюємо над тим, щоб мати зручніший спосіб цієї сталої підтримки. Це не просто дуже приємно, це дуже надихає, спонукає до подальшої роботи, але дійсно є все-таки вагомим внеском. Тому дуже-дуже вдячні.
Дякуємо вам за ту підтримку, яку ви нам надаєте. Насправді для нас важить навіть найменша сума. Це дуже важливо для нашої команди, яка професійно працює з нашим подкастом і дає нам можливість і далі спілкуватися і шукати найкращих, найцікавіших гостей, яких ви з меншою долею вірогідності ще десь можете почути, послухати, почитати, яких ми спеціально для вас з Наталкою відбираємо з усього світу буквально. Тому ми будемо вам дуже вдячні за посильний для вас донат на підтримку подкасту «Коли все має значення», нашої невеличкої команди. Ви зможете знайти реквізити на сайті лабораторії журналістики суспільного інтересу, а також на платформах, де є доступним наш подкаст, а це майже всі подкастингові платформи, які є доступними в Україні. Дуже вам дякую, почуємося.
So, Josephine, first of all, thank you. It's very, very, I wanted to say moving, but there is something else in that. It's not about moving, but still an exceptional feeling when you see that something you've never thought somebody would care, would be on the stage. Of course, we understand that people care about the war crimes committed in Ukraine. We understand it's important, but what is special also about the testimonies we collected, unfortunately, I'll use these words, unfortunately, there are more prominent crimes. There are cases about which people speak there in the press, but we talk to all kind of the people, and some of the stories are just so like one of many. And you wouldn't expect that all of a sudden the story of the ordinary man, extraordinary human being in the end, a god in the private house from Stoyanka, whose story isn't very much known, but which has been recorded by our colleague, Ira Lopatina, that it will be in the stage. It would be in the center of the art piece. So, of course, it's something very, very, very special. So that's probably where I want to start. But I want to ask you first, why did you do that play?
That's a great question. It's often the way that I start a project and I don't really know where I'm going to end up. I have a kind of burst of curiosity. I'm intrigued, and then I learn, and then the journey happens. So I don't think I knew that this would be where we are today. This is today's opening night of the show. We have the press coming in this evening. So I didn't know that that's where we would be when I started this project two years ago. But I would say in November 2022, I saw Peter Pomerantsev in London. He just said, listen, we've started this project. We're bringing together all this archive, and I want to find a way of holding people accountable for their crimes, not just in the court of law, but in the court of public opinion too. Can you do something about it? And, I'm an old friend of Peter's, and he's a dear friend, and I admire the work that he does a lot. And I just generally quite often I just say, yes, okay, that's fine, yes. So I sort of said yes without really understanding the consequences of the yes. And then I began to sort of do a little research and learn a little bit about the archive, realized that I needed to collaborate with a Ukrainian playwright. And at the time I was working with Anastasiia Kosodii on another production, the Crimea 5 a.m., which we also connected with Natalia because you interviewed some of the people for the Crimea 5 a.m. production. She and I was working with her, we got on, so I turned around to Anastasiia and I said, will you do this project with me? And she was like, sure. She also just said, yes. I think we're artists, that's what we say, yes, and what next? But also it just felt so important and so necessary. And like, you know, as artists, it is a duty. We have a duty to do what we can, to amplify, to bring, you know, to raise awareness and to kind of to kind of add an artistic voice to a conversation. So I sort of said yes, and then we started to read the testimonies and bring in therapy, you know, some support, kind of therapy support, well-being practitioners to help us as we read the testimonies, and then slowly we understood. And I would say quite early on, both of us read that testimony from the security guard from Stoyanka, and I read it and I thought, wow, this reads like a film script. It's an extraordinary story. This is the show. I mean, this is the show. I felt that quite quickly, actually.
I somehow caught a glimpse of a person. I immediately raised my hands. I said, don't shoot, don't shoot. Then he came out with his hands up. I said again, don't shoot, don't shoot. He started to approach me. He was already kind of unshaven. And I said, do you live here? And he said, yes, I live here. I said, listen, I live there. I said, let's go. Together, somehow. Maybe it will be better. It won't be so scary. And he said no. He said, no, I'm not going. They're going to come for me or something like that.
When you were reading those testimonies overall, because we provided with some also the ones which we also thought that there is something in them, you know, like the stories are so extraordinary that, you know, you can make a film out of each probably. What do you overall, before we go to the play, what have you seen there? Because, you know, like, you know, our team, we are collecting them. I've read not all of them, but many. You know, there is a couple of our editors who read all of them, but the ones which selected, we know them. And for us, it's unfortunately like this grim reality. We produce journalistic pieces, we file them to, you know, lawyers, analysts. But as an, you know, artist, what have you seen from what you know, like maybe didn't know in the news or something you knew in the news, but you just saw something?
I think initially we were finding moments of kind of connections between the stories. You know, there were so many stories about mobile phones, for example. Mobile phones cropped up in so many different ways through so many of the different testimonies. And so we were like that. We were like, what are the connection points like that we could, you know, could we do a show about mobiles, for example? I mean, we didn't. But that was that sort of sense. We were looking for things that cropped up. And I would say fairly early on, partly because through conversation with you, Natalia, but also with conversations with the analysts in who were working on kind of creating the algorithm that studies the testimonies and goes, okay, we'll take that bit as evidence for that crime and this bit as evidence for that crime. That was a fascinating conversation. We met Rajiv in Berlin. He was phenomenally insightful and helpful. And then I said to Rajiv at some point along the way, I said, the thing that's extraordinary for me about these testimonies is that not only do you get the call sign names, the amount, you know, the chevrons on the jacket, how many tanks there were, you get that detail which I can see the lawyers will need. But sort of buried in and amongst all of these bits of evidence are these really qualitative, profound reflections on like the nature of humanity, what people feel about justice, why they're interested in justice, their motivations, how they survived that night. You know, these acts of heroism, tiny acts of kindness, they are not the bits that are going to go to the courts. But it's obviously that bit, those bits that attracted Anastasiia and I, because they were the drama. That was like, that helped us understand the characters. And Rajiv said to me in response, well, that's why we work with journalists. In order to get the evidence, you kind of need to build the empathy connection. You need to go in, like, you need to create time. We went to work with journalists who are prepared to sit for hours and build trust with relationships with these witnesses. And then that comes out as part of the extraction for the evidence. We get these extraordinary things. And he said, I can't actually read the testimonies. He said, words make, I mean, obviously he does read them because he uses it, but he said, like, you know, he said words make memories in my mind. He said it's just, you know, it's too difficult for him. And he had enormous respect for the work of these journalists sitting there and listening. I would say that conversation, coupled with some reflections that you shared, Natalia, with me about the length of time it took, the respect and the admiration and the kindness that the journalists bring to the conversations. The line that you said to me once, which was, you know, we sit for hours and we cry with them when they cry. It was clear to me quite quickly that the journalists would be central to our play.
It won't be a spoiler, because I think, like, I can say I read the script before, but that was still extremely intriguing to see the play. So I think in our audience especially, like, not everybody will make it now to London in this June. I'm really hope that the play would be, you know, running in different theaters and globally. But I can explain, yes. So the play is based on more or less 5 characters, with the leading actor playing the man who survived tortures and beating in Stoyanka, Kyiv region, and there are other 4 survivors, the dentist from Snihurivka hospital, the volunteer and survivor from Kramatorsk attack on the train station, the priest from Zaporizhzhia region, and the mother from Kyiv region who has unfortunately lost her child while trying to get out. And what is interesting that you build a play in, I'll still probably like to elaborate a bit more, that, like, you started about this process, but in the end, you really, like, choose that, for instance, one actor is playing the man, but there are 2 other Ukrainian actors who are not exactly playing the characters. They are doing the monologues because they have 2 roles, and the guy would, you know, like, would speak on behalf of the mother. And I find it also very respectful and interesting choice, because being completely honest, you know, knowing the people, you kind of thinking like, oh, these people we know, how they would be like on the stage, you know, what is it in the theater? But now that you have this kind of humble way to tell the voices, but also preserve this idea that there are, like, symbolic people symbolizing the testimonies. Can you just a bit explain how these kind of things work in your head, how it's made up?
I mean, I would say the process was quite incremental. We learned a lot. We did a sort of research and development week in December 2023 with 4 Ukrainian actors and 2 British actors. So I had even more testimonies then. We actually, I think initially, when we did our kind of initial cull, Anastasiia and I thought, gosh, there are just so many good stories. And I think we had like 8 maybe initially, and then it was just 8 voices. 8 stories became too many, so we cut back to 4. It was always really important for me, first of all, that this cast comprised Ukrainian actors as well as British actors. They owned the story. It was their story, the Ukrainian actors. And really importantly, we would have Ukrainian in the show. So then I needed to find out how we would explore how we would involve translation in that, so that our British audiences would understand what's going on, but also needing to have preserved the language. It felt very important. From that beginning work, of working with kind of verbatim text, partly because I'm working in translation, and of course, quite a few of these testimonies were given in Russian and are now being heard in Ukrainian because Anastasiia is translating them. It's not like there is some version of documentary verbatim theatre, which is literally you put an actor in a room, they have headphones on their heads, they hear the voice in a voice of the original person speaking, and then they speak them. And then in that kind of very classic verbatim thing, they are finding in the intonation, in the voice, in the breath, and the pauses, in the ers and the ums, they're finding exactly the same kind of, they are effectively a vessel for the original voice of the person who spoke it. Because we're working in translation, and because we're working in a different country, and I'm thinking about a different audience, I sort of knew immediately that I wasn't going to do classic verbatim in this show. It was going to be something else. I just thought it's just a joy to have, from an audience perspective, to watch actors understanding and seeking a relationship with the real people. So actually, when you sit in the room as an audience member, you're seeing two people in a way. You're watching, you're seeing being brought to life the original person, but you're also experiencing an actor struggling with learning, falling in love with the character whose life they're telling. It's like a double privilege, and that's the thing that I wanted to do with this piece. So actually, I did not introduce the original witnesses to our actors until right at the end, actually right at the end of the whole rehearsal process, because I wanted them to feel their way into the roles, to build a relationship with them and understanding with them. And it was quite striking for our actors, I think, it was only in our final rehearsals in the theatre in technical week rehearsals last week that they saw, because at the end of the show we project the original people, the real people, and they were like, oh, that's what the dentist looks like, that's what the mother looks like. So it was quite late, because I just felt it was important. It would have been confusing for our actors, I think, to sort of see a picture and try and because they're never going to become these people, and it's not their job to become them. So I wanted to give a little bit of distance from them.
Yeah, I also think that, like, we feel the responsibility to tell the stories of, most of the people who were speaking to us and won't make their stories public. There are still a few who still don't want that their stories are public. They are for investigation, for the research purposes. So you really need always to explain why that is selected, that is not selected. But I also think that for the audience, it's really, in the end, they are the symbols. They symbolize, they represent not just himself or herself, but they do represent kind of like the victims who lived through something. So therefore, for me, it's quite a usual thing, because we also do this a bit selections for journalism, for what story we do, what we write. So you really understand that you select something to show the bigger picture. It's not exactly you need to tell that.
I guess I was going to add that in the case of the mother's story, it's the story that really resonated most with me. I mean, all of the stories I read were extraordinary. I realized with working with Anastasiia, when we read these testimonies, there are some stories that resonated and we found harder to read than others. So for Anastasiia, it was the stories from the Zaporizhzhia region, which is where she's from. So all of the stories from that area, she understood, she knew that checkpoint, she knew those roads, that, those places were really hard for her to read. And for me, as a parent, I think it was the story of the mother losing her child. It's a very difficult story, and it's told, it's very powerful. It comes out as this sort of purging, the way that the story emerges from when you read in the testimony, in the transcript. And it was a very deliberate decision for me to cast the man, a male actor, to play this role, because I thought it gave us a little bit of distance. He plays it brilliantly. He's an extraordinary woman. But he also just provides it. I think it just helps for an audience perspective for it not to be a woman, a female actor playing that mother.
So I'll explain that we have in parallel two voices, the one in Ukrainian, and then the journalist, a British actor, kind of tells the same story in English as if she's repeating after the person speaking, which...
Мене привели в кабінет.
They took you to the office?
І одразу з порога вони почали зачитувати мені оцей приговор.
As soon as you got there, they started reading your sentence.
Ви там, Квашко, Василь Леонідович, за пособія тероризму, згідно законодавства Російської Федерації, ви затримані, заарештовані. Далі вони мене посадили в машину.
They put you in the car?
Мені навдівали наручники.
They didn't handcuff you.
Вони сказали, що в мене сьогодні є така поблажка, як до священника.
They said you had special privileges as a priest.
Of course, for me, it's very hard to understand how it's felt, because I understand both languages. Yet the colleagues, the friends, the people whom I talk, because I've been to the play before, the foreigners, the British, they really said that, like, they really appreciate that language. They didn't understand anything of Ukrainian, but it really worked for them, because, like, for us, it's obviously working. You hear both. Can you a bit explain as well? So everything is very factual there. So what is for us important, like that if it's a documentary theater, they're factual. There is no fiction. Of course, like they not invent, they not overdo. I truly, truly appreciate it. I think it's like there is something to preserve. If we're already speaking about the documentary theater, it's better it is as it is. But you worked with the journalist, like you kind of created the joint picture of kind of the journalist you imagine, to be the transmitter. So what is fictional in that? What is not fictional?
We spoke to quite a few journalists, and of course, we've come across quite a lot of journalists because we read so many of these transcripts. So we've learned the importance and the value of their role. We in the UK we really like fiction. Like, we like to kind of immerse ourselves in a world and believe truly in that world, and sort of fall in love with our characters and kind of go on the journeys with them. In Europe, in where Anastasiia is currently based, because she since the war, she's first full-scale invasion, she's been living in Berlin. She's quite used to this sort of much more Brechtian style theatre of like theatre of alienation, where, we never, in Germany, in Berlin, like, the audiences in the theatre were never expected to truly believe something, because someone explained it to me. If you really create a theatre where the audiences can lose themselves and believe fully in this fiction, you might end up with Hitler again. So they alienate all the time. They pull away. They remind us. They use microphones. They use changing the lighting. The actors step into the character. They step out of the character. They're used to dislocating as a theatrical device. We don't have that same theatrical world. So I had this sort of pull, yes, to do that with our show. Yes, to honour the stories, the real life testimonies, but also to create a piece of fictional, compelling drama that our audiences would just fall for, would immerse themselves in. And so I needed to find a way of creating a drama between our main character, the man from Stoyanka, and the journalist. What was their journey like? Did they create a connection? Because this play is all about connections. It's all about trust and opening up.
So the Russians left Stoyanka and let you live?
Yeah. They just ordered me not to leave the house for 2 hours.
But after they were gone for sure, what did you do? Did you not try to evacuate?
Honestly, I didn't even think about it.
And could we explore a way in which not only can our witness feel comfortable sharing, but also what happens to the perceiver of that story? Are they changed by hearing a story? How do they, And one of our journalists that we did talk to told me about how she'd been affected by hearing all these testimonies, how she heard, and she now lives with all of the stories of all of the testimony, all these witnesses that she's met in her brain. I became a little bit interested a few years ago in an experience that an academic called Marianne Hirsch has called post-memory. Post-memory she identified as an experience that happens in the children of Holocaust survivors whose parents have such overwhelming memories that there's no space for their children to develop their own memories. Their parents' memories become their memories. And I've become interested in that as a phenomenon, and I wondered if there might be something equivalent for these journalists. So we have slightly fictionalized that. So we fictionalized it around, inspired by the conversation with the journalist and the work that I've done, we started to see about whether we could build that as a fiction into our play and depict a journalist who lives with all the memories of all the people that she's ever met since, covering the testimonies, and what that does to her own memories. And can we crack open that thing for her through the course of the play so that she can touch her own memories and share her own guilt, because everyone carries guilt and responsibility. And yeah, that's fictional. We've invented but it's all rooted in real life stories. It's not, with the story of the woman who ran for the bridge with the cats, which is our journalist story. It's a real story. It's just we've given it to our character.
But by the way, I can. In fact, what is also fascinating that just a number of the coincidence. So, Irina, who collected the stories of the man of Stoyanka and the mother, she's literally the editor of this podcast.
Oh God,
so she is.
I'm really sorry, Irina. When you hear you
so
hear this.
Irina will be traveling for the play. It's great, but it's exactly her. And all of a sudden, and I think I can afford to praise her for the audience, also for the whole job she's doing with this podcast. I'm not referring to the audience of the podcast. Also, I find it extremely fascinating, and I can share. I don't know how it's for her now to translate me speaking about her and also talking about her. But I should also say she played such a crucial role for our project, because Irina stopped to collect testimonies after the first year, But she, you know, like was like, let's say like that. I don't want to undermine everybody's job, but there are journalists who are more famous, less famous, the ones who are more public, less public. So she used to work as a like field reporter for the radio and like not being kind of like a public, you know, like very public person compared to quite a lot of, you know, others in our team. But not just she was exactly the one who collected this testimony, which was the first really story we did and which has been published internationally about the deportation of the Ukrainian children, which also were used, we believe, in the, you know, opening the case by the International Criminal Court against Vladimir Putin, you know, like, so she did quite a like fascinating job. It's like, it's exactly her story is now in, you know, in the theater, and really she inspired partially, you know, like the role of this journalist. But you were speaking about this memory, and I cannot like, I've just read on my way to London book based on also on our testimonies by another our researcher, Svetlana Oslavska, who interviewed Irina for her book as well. And there was something very interesting when, because, you know, I didn't talk to Ira about that, but and I also want to promote this book as well. It's called On Own, you know, Feeling with Own Skin, that she really have this memory of a person who remember, you know, like the visuals from the death. It's not that story of the mother. It's a story from Mariupol, where, you know, one of the relatives remember the, you know, the hairs, the girl in the car, which kind of died. And she said, like, I've never seen that girl, but I remember her as if I've seen her.
So she told us this exactly, and there's a version of the script where we actually told where we tell that text. The girl from, you know, she went to Riga, didn't she? And she heard, I think she went to meet the people, and she heard the memory of the girl from the car in the red dress with the white car, whatever it was. It's it with the hair, and we took it out of the text in the end because it's so moving and so powerful and too much.
Yeah, but it stays in a different book now. My question would be, yes, I would understand that the two actors are Ukrainian and the two are British. And I had this fascinating conversation with the actor who played the guard. It was very, very moving and touching. From your experience, what it is, this experience for the British actors? You know, like one thing is somebody like you who doing, let's say, political theater, you know, like the theater which is about the human rights, the documentary theater, or like we speak to the analysts, journalists who cover, you know, we talk to a lot of foreigners, but most of the foreigners we speak, they know a lot about the war, they are focused at war, you know, it's not something new for them. Of course, they're emotional, but here is like a person from art scene who is an actor who lives in London. I really I don't know much about the particular person I'm speaking, but I'm really interested, you know, how have you also seen how this, you know, like the real war in a different country now, do you think, what does it mean for those actors? The people who coming not from the craft, from the vocation of the war correspondent and sign to see those atrocities?
It's a really good question. We brought the wellbeing practitioner who Anastasiia and I worked with in 2023 back into the room to support our actors, to help them think about how to look after themselves while they handle this material. And so that was one of the early moments that we did, was set up care, structures of care to support people. You know, they are touching this stuff very deeply. Of course, for the Ukrainian actors, as you acknowledge, it's a different thing. I think they feel a sense of responsibility. It's their, you know, and honour. But actually, for the British actors too, I think they feel a sense of responsibility of doing these people proud, like, you know, bringing them looking after them with care and respect. They've fallen for them, and they're still trying. I mean, you know, we're a week into the rehearsal, we're a week into the shows, and they're still learning about their characters in a way. Every night, I've been watching the show every night since we opened. I've been doing little notes every night for them, you know, and I see them learning more every time we do a run. Oh, that's how they feel. Oh, this is how, okay. Marianne, who plays the journalist, said to me last night, I think I'm going to try something this evening where the journalist who, you know, to whom we've given Irina's story about stepping back from the testimonies, she's going to kind of come to that realization in the moment. And she really played that really well last night, so they're still learning. And the other thing that Marianne said to me yesterday was that she'd gone for coffee with an international war journalist to talk to them about how they ask questions. And this person who hasn't been to Ukraine, has been in other wars around the world, other conflicts, gave us some really interesting and helpful insights. And they've all said to me, because we've got this sort of added touch of bringing real people with real experiences into the end of the show. So we finish up production every night, and then for the last 5 minutes before we let the audiences back out, we help them get out into the real world by introducing them to a real person who has real life experience in activism, in journalism. You spoke on Monday night, Natalia, it was wonderful. In legal world, in kind of humanitarian aid, in everything. So to offer things to our audiences about what they can do to do something when we go out into the world. Like, how can they get involved? How can they sign a petition? How can they give money? The actors have reflected to me how powerful it is to sit in a room and listen to people, to listen to you. They're learning still. I hadn't really anticipated that not only are the audience learning in that moment, but because the actors stay and listen to that post-show chat too, they are gaining a greater understanding, and that understanding is impacting on the way that they're telling the story. I suppose it's a responsibility they feel, but also it's a job. They're being paid to do the job. I mean, that's the kind of extraordinary thing about actors, right?
I should also say we are paid to do our job as well.
I don't mean it like that, but it's a different. You're right. The motivation is different for them. But next month they'll be on another show and they'll do that same immersion into a world.
So, of course, you're very much inside of the whole thing. What are the interesting things you heard? What was the response? Of course, I'm interested in different types of audiences, but there were a few shows till now.
God, it's really early. I think we have food as part of our show. I explained last night to somebody that it was because some of the texts, some of the transcripts are not very palatable. And so giving people some food, a little sweetness, a little smell, a little, because you can smell the dill that's being chopped. It helps to sweeten the pill, I suppose. Sorry, I'm going to get away from the food metaphors, but like there is something useful about the food, and people have talked about how important it is, and we give our audiences we share our meal with the audiences at the end, so they become part of it and complicit, and that's been lovely feedback. I think people have found hearing Ukrainian really powerful. Last night, someone was really these post-show conversations that we do at the end of the show. We ask our speaker the same question that starts the show, starts the production, which is the journalist asks, "When did the war begin for you?" And that's what starts our show, and then we ask the same thing to our audience, to our post-show speaker. I spoke last night, so I did one for me. I said I was asked that question, and then we had a kind of short Q&A with a few people afterwards. And this guy said to me, if I were to be asked that question, when did the war begin for me, it would be tonight. The war began for me tonight. And I thought, well, that's amazing. If we can do that, if we can introduce this story in a different way, bring real people's stories, create human, move beyond the newspapers, move beyond the videos for our audiences to encounter humans. That's enough for me.
I'd ask you, as a director for the documentary theater, what are the things you shouldn't do? I really would be very honest, because I've seen a lot of bad theater. And, I knew that, from the Crimea 5 a.m. that, you're brilliant the way you work. But the theater can be embarrassing, and I've seen quite a few plays, including about this war, which I find I didn't feel comfortable, not because it was tragic, but because it was overdone, because it was you try to put into the worlds of the character, kind of the message, which is not human, but it's more as if it's a proclamation, a political statement spoken by a kid, which you really don't believe in that. Or it can be cheesy, it can be embarrassing. Also, when you speak about people who are, lived through something tragic, it can be overdone. So there is something very sensitive about the documentary theater, especially the theater about the tragic experience, like this one, and it couldn't be more, it's the most sensitive material, wherever you think about that. What are the rules of the good theater? How not to create the situation when it's a bit artificial, a bit overdone, a bit, exaggerated, a bit maybe the ones which becoming like, I don't think like propagandistic, but like sometimes I think like it would work for me, it would work for Ukrainian who kind of agree with, that the fact that the Kremlin is horrible and committed this crime, but it might be like not something the British audience or a person who's coming in Dalston and is not that much wouldn't trust. So what are your rules? What are the ways? What are the ways to do that? What also where you think like, we don't do that, that would be too much, we don't do this, I won't tell that, the actor shouldn't be.
I think first and foremost, it's really vital to have the right people in the room. So the right, really, really powerful, moving, empathetic actors, and a creative team who kind of get the nuance. So I can't take credit for this piece fully. Like it is good. I believe it is good because of the movement director who I've worked with, who's wonderful, Josie Daxter, who helped me think about how to be quite playful sometimes with the physicality, with the cook, the chef, Olya Hercules, with the lighting designer, with the sound designer, with the composer. I mean, it works because of the brilliant eyes, the brilliant kind of creative brains of so many people in the show. The designer too. Amazing design. So that's one thought. I think the thing that I was saying earlier about the alienation devices are quite useful because it is important. I think it wouldn't work if we were fully in the world of this fictional, slightly weird world of the man from Stoyanka. We needed to alienate people. We needed to remind them that these are real stories, that these, and that's another thing. I think that's sort of the sense that we've gone about bringing together that Brechtian jarring alienation with this fictional thing, and that sense of the smudge together of those two worlds, I think, is quite important. And then I think there's just an eye. There is like a moment of going, that's too much. It's too much. I think I just did that a lot. I would be like, we would play, we'd be doing some work with physicality, we'd be trying to tell the man from Stoyanka's story. And, we've got these two Ukrainian, gorgeous actors who move so powerfully. And so, sometimes we were physically showing that story as well as telling it. And then, an actor would offer something in the world of our rehearsal room, and, whether it was physically touching somebody or pushing them. And then I'd be like, oh no, that's too much. We don't need to see it and hear it. So I think it's a really detailed, quite forensic approach to what's the level of impact that we want to hit in this moment for our audiences? How visible is it? How audible is it? And how do we work with all those senses so that it's never too much? It's always a lot, but it's never too much. And then we could pull back. And then we need a joke because humour works too, right? Because humour lands the serious stuff.
Yes, of course. I know I can 100% reconfirm because that story, I'll tell this, I still can't forget how I was laughing interviewing that dentist.
So good.
And there is this phrase, and I really would repeat because honestly, it's on the stage, it's in the article, it's in the documentary film. And I would never forget, this person when I'm telling the story, I'm retelling it, that we were in Snihurivka in the hospital, which was deoccupied after a few days, cold, difficult. We just arrived there. The town was still inaccessible for the rest of the journalists. And we talked to this very warm dentist who really was speaking Ukrainian, and she was speaking in Ukrainian, how she was talking and more or less preaching the Russian soldiers which were at her dentist's seat. She was a meter out of me. My colleague was with the camera, and I'm asking how were you not afraid to preach the soldiers? And she literally said maybe everybody's afraid of dentists. I'm that's so funny. That's I really think because it's preserved on the record because it's in the movie, in the documentary. You haven't seen the documentary. With those who want to watch the documentary, they can see. You still kind of hear this voice because it was impossible to edit without me asking this question. I was like, why are you not afraid? And she's like, because everybody is afraid of dentists, baby. You're like, yes, everybody is afraid of dentists. It's true. And he I still don't remember why somebody would say that. It was a hilarious answer. It was the most hilarious answer I've heard. So I absolutely nobody would miss this phrase. And because we're also showing the documentary in various contexts. It could be Mexico, it could be South Africa. I'm always waiting to this moment when the audience would laugh.
It's so good to hear, and it's so funny because I haven't seen the video and I haven't seen that. And I read that testimony and I found it quite hard. I don't know why. On the page, it's quite a sort of strange, jarring, long interview. And I could see that she was funny, but I couldn't quite make head or tail of the English. So it just because I read it in literal translation. So it's, to read it in Ukrainian, you could sort of tell it was different. But in English, it was less humorous, I would say. But the more I understood that role and that character and where we were going to put it in the play, because it's towards the end of the play. And I realised that because we're hearing all these witnesses in our play through the memory of the journalist, I realised quite late in the day that the dentist is a good memory for the journalist. So validating for Anastasiia and my choices that it really is that like that. So it's moving for me to hear that.
What do you want to reach with the play here in London now? What is your aim?
Lots of audiences.
Okay.
We need lots of people to come.
So we call everybody who listens to tell the people to travel to London. If there are people in Europe, I'm not a very much theater goer, I'm not that much. But in my life, I deliberately came to see the plays in different capitals, so I do that. It's actually very normal to buy the ticket, to book a flight and travel to see the play. Some people now asking me, is it online? So no, it's theater. It's theater. You need to experience that. So I suggest people do. I would repeat again, it's every day except Sundays till June 28th, but we hope it will be there. But still beyond, to reach audience for what? We also understand that this play won't all of a sudden, because it's a play, there are limited number of places. It's not like the Broadway show, where thousands and hundreds thousands would come. It's not like the musical. There is a difference between the pop hit. It's it won't win an Oscar, I wish you all the awards, but I mean we understand the limits. So I want also to understand, how much do you think it's possible to do with that? What is your kind of the goal? What you can think this type of plays can achieve, what they can do?
I think I have two answers for you. One of them is kind of more internal, and it's really for you, Natalia, which is I remember was something that you said to me 2 years ago when we started to talk about the play, and you said, so I meet all these people and I can't promise them justice for their particular crime. For what happened to them, I can't promise them that we will find the person who did that to them, but I can promise them that I can offer them the fact that their voices will be heard and the stories will be remembered and the people whose lives are lost will be kept, will be held on to. And I hope that we are doing that in this show, that we are doing that. We are adding to our work to support you and your work and the Reckoning Project and Public Interest Journalism Lab to amplify and to hold on to and to validate these extraordinary lives. That's one thought. What I really want people to feel when they leave the show is to have seen and been seen through this process, to see what's really happening and to see these extraordinary, ordinary people's lives that are being, who are just like them, who were just born in the other side of Europe, to see that, and then to be seen and to feel complicit and responsible to do something about it. That thing of letting people going out in the world and giving them things to do feels really important. So I'm playing with that in the theatre. We're breaking the fourth wall in kind of theatrical language so that the audience are part of it. They're eating food with us. They're holding food. The lights never go fully down, so you can see your fellow audience members in the theatre. And that sense of being complicit and responsible, I want people to take out into the world and do something about it. And yes, you're right, I'm only going to, we only have a limited reach through our theatre because it's small and intimate, but I hope that there will be a trickle-down effect from that.
Of course, because, there is this debate. I used to work in the news and now I work kind of in more slow journalism, with longer pieces and documentaries. And people always try to find an hierarchy. And I remember once when I was still studying, I met this incredible, Australian journalists who were working for Channel 4, doing the stories from the Middle East. And they were working for the news. And you thought why the people who are super senior still do this 2 minutes report for the news? Not the documentaries and things like that. And they would say they are the most watched. this is the biggest impact. At the same time, you know, like the one documentary when may change the perception, one books in Ukraine, you know, like the amount, you know, usually in Ukraine, it's a very usual, like low amount of books are published. Usually the book has like 1,500 copies, 2,000 copies. If you really think about figures, about, you know, article with 10,000 clicks and the book with 2,000 and the price to produce it, you like, wow, actually, it's a very costly experience for a very limited group of people. To sell 700 books is considered to be success on the war crimes, on something like that. So of course it's a different, like, but this experience was you forever probably, you know, forever probably. And for those who've never, and I always insist, and like when I have my reservations about, you know, coming to a distant place to show our documentary, which probably would be a small audience, you know, like a university in Guadalajara, which was like my experience. And I thought like, is it worthy? It's like, it's a documentary, it's not an article, but there were like 100 students. But you think like, I remember I myself was a student and I've seen one film about Palestine. I've seen one film about Argentina, but I would remember for the whole life that exactly film. So that's how it works. So I do think it's kind of the thing, but maybe you say like how it's usually worked, because I do think in our audience, there are people who know the Reckoning Project, who know what we are doing. They're curious, like how this complicated world of theater works, that, you know, like you stage in one theater for like months, then you can move. It depends, of course, of money, of the funding, but it's possible, to have the other places. Because people kept asking me the questions. Would it be in a different country? Would it be in different play? Would it be elsewhere? Is it just this time? I do understand it all depends on the money, on the interest, on the, whether there is a reception of the show. So I urge everybody to support the show so it lived longer, But just kind of explain, because we are not aware of that.
Yeah. I mean, it is phenomenally expensive to stage a production, because you're paying for the cast, for the actors and the rehearsals, and then the set, and then like the production. It's a big team. I mean, there are about 20 of us working on this show. So yes, that's immensely expensive. Unfortunately, you don't recoup the income through ticket sales. So it's a tiny fraction, actually, the income is from ticket sales. So on top of the ticket sales income in the box office, we also have had to do a lot of fundraising with individuals who've kindly supported the show, with trusts and foundations who've given us grants. So it's a big job to raise the funds. However, we would really love to find a way for this project to go beyond the Arcola Theatre, to tour the UK, to tour Europe, to one day go to Ukraine, to go to America. It's an ambition, but it's more than an ambition. It's part of a long-term plan for us. So it's subject to us being successfully received when the reviews come out and the interest being there. It's the beginning of the journey for the Reckoning.
What is your story about working with a documentary theater? Where did you start it? What were the latest projects? How you actually come into telling the story of our part of the world, including the Crimea 5 a.m.?
I think it's been very incremental. The company I co-founded and I continue to run, Dash Arts, has been going for 20 years. This is our 20th year, actually, with this show. We're celebrating our anniversary. And our intention has always been to create artistic work that challenge the way we see the world. And we do that by meeting artists, performers, communities, audiences, artists of all kinds. We do that by creating work with artists internationally, with performers and academics and participants, and then make projects with them. And lived experience is always a massive part of that journey. I'm really interested in creating work with lived experience and expertise. And so I would say probably since our very inception, we have tried to find ways to incorporate real life, real voices, real people in our productions. But every show is different. And every production is different. So sometimes there's verbatim documentary theatre, sometimes it's entirely fictional, and sometimes but it's always involved that deep research that goes into the creation of a show, really trying to understand the world we're working with before we make the project. We worked in the Arabic-speaking world around 2010 and around that time, 2012. And then in 2012, we started a project trying to understand what it was like to live in the Soviet Union and in its shadows. So we spent about 5 years between 2012 and 2017 making work with artists from across the former Soviet republics. It was in that context that I started to work with Ukrainian artists. In 2014, I went to Kyiv just after the Maidan, and met some unbelievable musicians, artists, performers, and heard their stories. And I made a project actually then with musicians. I was really interested in kind of classically trained musicians who'd been trained in the conservatoire and were no longer working in the conservatoires, and they were working in rock and pop and jazz and electronica and contemporary classical. And I was interested in the journeys that those musicians had made from this shared experience from across all the former republics. And I made a show, and Natalka Vorishpit wrote the text for the production. So I started to make work then. At Dash Arts, we stopped formally working in 2017 with artists from across that region. And then we started to do a completely different project looking at what it means to be European after the Brexit referendum. So it was a different project, but I sustained the connections with my European friends and colleagues, and I wanted to keep working with them. And in 2021, we made a production called Songs for Babyn Yar, which was a show about the legacy of Babyn Yar in Kyiv. And we worked with 3 wonderful Ukrainian actors, Svetlana Kundish, Mariana Sadovska, and Yuri Gerzi.
I was at that play because Mariana is a friend.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was an amazing play.
Yeah.
A very deep, and I still think like it's for me still a bit tragedy that I think that could be still a lot more done with Babyn Yar. With that show, but I also saying with telling the story of Babyn Yar, because wherever you say with all the attempts, it's still not fully
It really
understood.
isn't. And I really felt it's a beautiful show involving real life stories and testimonies from the actors, and also poetry and prose and music. A beautiful piece. And we came to Kyiv in December 21, where you were there at Theatre Podil. And the post-show conversation was, I think, longer than our performance.
I think, yeah, I've been there. Yeah, I remember.
And
Yeah.
it was this incredible, like, I don't know if you spoke, Natalia, but like it was this incredible outpouring.
We didn't know each other
We didn't
yet
know.
then. I knew Mariana,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I feel
yeah.
like she was at the heart
She
for
was
me.
there.
Yeah, Natal. Yeah.
But I don't know if you remember, there was this outpouring of people just needed to talk. They just needed to acknowledge that their responsibility, their story, their family story. And I really felt like in that moment, to your point, work was being done. Like Ukraine, there was a big journey of coming to terms with history and the legacy and responsibility. And that thing, there was a line that Mariana said in our play, which was about what it is to have a legacy of being both the victim and the perpetrator. And it was so brave that she said that. And it was such a brave conversation that came out as a result of that in the room. And then, of course, all of that conversation has stopped since the war, because it's been paled into comparison with fighting an aggressor who's in your land. So I agree with you. I felt incredibly moved and saddened that work has had to be put on pause.
And then you walked on Crimea 5 a.m.
Yeah, and then I got distracted with Babyn Yar. Then we worked on Crimea 5 a.m. Partly because I was in Kyiv with Songs for Babyn Yar, and when we were there, our colleagues at the Ukrainian Institute in Kyiv said, "We'd love you to work on this show." So they gave me the text for Crimea 5 a.m. when I was in Kyiv, and then I sort of took it, went home, back to London. The war broke out. With the full-scale Russian invasion, and then everything slightly went on pause. And then the Crimea 5 a.m. happened in London, thanks to the British Council, who stepped in to support that. And so I did that project, and then that catches us up. So I would say it's been like 10 years of, at least 12 years of working with Ukrainian actors, musicians, performers, and hopefully not the end.
Definitely not. I wouldn't ask that from the actors, but you, the director of the play. After the show, within the next days, me and my colleagues would be able to speak to the people whose stories were on the stage. What would you like? What would be the message to them? My task would be to say, the show is good, your story is told, I can verify and vouch, it's done with all due respect, and it's there, it's working. But I do think it's also partial, I feel that things that for us, we're working with that, we here, we in London, I'm here, I traveled from Kyiv, okay, it's like a long trip, but I enjoy the play, I'm here, I'm watching, I'm like, people telling thanks to me, however, I'm okay. It's them who live in their circumstances, they still live with their grievances, with their tragedies. But I feel like there is something we owe to them, to tell after what has been staged. What would you like to? It is like, it can be something.
I think that's such a great question, and I feel like, wow, I feel like lots of things I'd like to say to thank them for. I think firstly, just to say what a privilege and an honour it has been to get to know them through their stories and what happened to them. And I think I would want to thank them first of all and let them know that, and send my deep well of kind of sort of I think to say sorry is just feels wrong, but that sense of I have this deep well of sympathy and love and empathy and admiration for them for having gone through this experience and being able to tell it to us and to trust us to share that. So that's sort of all of those emotions I feel really important. And then I think for Petro himself, who has given us our main super story, just again all of those emotions, and I would love you to pass on to him that he did give us permission to share his testimony, and we're very grateful to him. And I feel like he had a bit of uncertainty about whether he wanted us to tell the whole story about how he buried the bodies that he came across on the street in Kyiv. And I'm very grateful to him for letting us tell that bit of the story, because for me, I have the most overwhelming respect for what he did. He from what I can understand, he wandered through this completely abandoned landscape. He came across bodies. He was worried about them because he was aware the dogs that were wild and hungry might ravage them. And so he took on the responsibility of burying those bodies because there was no one else to do that job. And I can imagine that there were shallow graves and there were no family members there to do the honour of burying the body. And that weighed on him, that it was him, and he wasn't able to do the proper justice to those bodies. And I imagine that he had a responsibility. He feels a sense of guilt for that, or whatever it was. But to me, I can only feel just deep respect and admiration for him. And so I want to pass that on, for those lives for the lives that he's looked after. I grant him my thanks, but also thank you for letting us tell that bit of the story, because it's a very important part of our show.
So I'll take this also responsibility to pass, because sometimes it's not like you don't feel comfortable, you feel cautious, you still maintain relations with the people, but, as a journalist, you try to keep some distance.
Yeah.
And, some people are very responsive and it's easy to chat with them at any time. Sometimes you need to, keep your courage to call and tell, due to different reasons. Because you never know how the person will react. So I ask this question to take this responsibility for myself and to promise, to call them and to speak. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And wish all the best for the play.
Thank you so much.